for joining us. Hold on. I need to pull up. There we go. Thanks for joining us tonight. We've got a really interesting and informative meeting and some great speakers. So we want to get started. First, I just wanted to let you guys know that the way this is going to work is we'll have Reid, McCollum doing a presentation, then Marj Halperin, then we'll take some questions on that. So if you have any questions along the way, please put them in the chat. And then Kitty's going to monitor the chat and make sure that all those questions get asked. And then Nancy Bruski and Kathy Johnson are going to share their canvassing experiences, and then I'll wrap it up. So we're very excited to have them here. So let's not wait to get started. I think lots of you have met Reid before, but he is the Program Outreach Director for Progressive Turnout Project, which is the largest direct voter contact organization in the country. He helped lead the Coalition for a Better Illinois 6 that helped flip the Illinois 6th Congressional District in 2018. He's knocked more than 12,000 doors since 2017, but who's counting? And has a passion for getting folks who may not have canvassed before to give it a try. So that's what our goal is tonight. So Reid, if you can share with us, that'd be awesome.
Hey, great. I'm glad to be here. Let me share my screen really quick. So these are real basic slides. I'm going to sort of talk through, that first I'm going to try to sell you on the recruitment piece of this, that canvassing is for you. Knocking doors is easy, effective, and rewarding. So I'm going to sort of set that up, and then Marj is going to really go through training, but also so you can really understand what the canvassing experience is like. So, but I do want to start with just really you're not going to want to go out there and knock doors if you don't feel optimistic or that it's going to make a difference. And some of that is just really, what we're heading into over the next 4.5 months. So this is sort of my quick little prelude with optimism. As somebody that's very connected to political strategy and what the folks who are looking at polls every day truly think. It is absolutely the case this year that the voters who will determine the outcome this year are not yet paying attention. They are actively avoiding political news. And so this cake is not even remotely baked at this point. There is so much opportunity for us to connect to voters over the next 4.5 months. Polls also they don't vote. It's actually our actions that'll determine the outcome. From 26 million postcards to all of the efforts that we're doing to go up to places like Wisconsin and Michigan and knock doors. None of that is factored in. And this whole thing is going to be decided over the last sort of few weeks in the fall. So also just don't let the media gaslight you. Democrats have absolutely been on a winning streak every election cycle since 2016. They've either won outright or massively overperformed. And so, the election will likely be very, very close, but when voters really understand the stakes, we've done really well recently. This is actually just some social science, which is, what motivates people to take action. Two strong emotions for motivating action are anger and hope. And, even though there's a lot to be afraid of, it's good to remember that fear and powerlessness don't actually motivate people to action. So the stakes couldn't be higher. This could be our last election ever, but that's not really something that galvanizes people to want to get involved. It may be for some of us, but for the average volunteer, especially the average voter, it's anger and hope that what they do can make a difference. And if you don't believe me, remember this feeling. So this is from one of the Women's March. This is the second Women's March, or it wasn't the original one, but this is the spirit of being really pissed off about what Republicans would do and the fact that we're not alone. So, all right, so now you're super inspired. You're still mad as hell, and you want to take action, and we're going to win this thing. So, great. What can I do other than knocking doors? Because I will literally do anything other than knocking doors. I would rather have a root canal than go knock doors. No, that's the wrong mindset. So. Why should you give knocking doors a try if you haven't done it before? It's because having real conversations is the most effective way to get folks to vote. It doesn't have to be strangers door to door. If you have family and friends in a swing state or even here, Conversations with your friends and family are also extremely important. Many people would actually much rather have a conversation with a total stranger than a family or friend. There's less sort of at stake in terms of that conversation. The data show that every conversation, especially during the fall, with somebody makes them 7% more likely to vote. And I was not a math major, but I had been told that translates to every 14 conversations you add a vote. So that's about 2 hours of canvassing. You have about 14 conversations, you add a vote. So if you can do more than just one canvassing turf, then that's incredible. And these elections are going to be really close. So it's the most effective thing that you can do. And this is the math behind that. Most people, this is a misconception, is that just like nobody wants to talk to you and you're going to be out there just talking doors and having everybody frown and be like, God, oh no, there's somebody at the door. And just, that's the wrong mindset. Most people actually really do welcome a conversation about voting, and actually, especially with a stranger, because that works both ways. Is they can sort of open up and just, there's just like no, they're never going to see you again. So it's totally fine. They can sort of be introspective and just, and do that. It's also, it's not just that knocking doors is the most effective thing. It's that the conversations that you will have if you are out there cannot happen without you. And that might sound weird, but it's sort of like, if you think about text messages that campaigns are going to send, or TV ads, there's a concept of just diminishing returns or saturation where, at some point, $50 million is enough in Montana for people to know who John Tester is, but the doors will not all be knocked enough to have those conversations. So your contribution doesn't mean that somebody else could have done that work. It is at the margin. So that's a really important concept in a presidential election, is that your contributions are adding to the overall effort. You will be adding votes that are not somebody else's votes. Those conversations are only conversations that you can have. We're almost through this. I want to give a little bit of now behind the curtain, like what are the different types of canvassing? I call it door knocking because canvassing, even that is sort of jargon. So, and this is so that you kind of understand sort of how it's really just more about the strategy, because you want to know not just the statistic, like every conversation makes somebody 7% more likely to vote, but like what's actually happening here? Like what is the strategy and how does canvassing fit into it? In a campaign cycle, there's sort of the first phase, and I'll call it classic persuasion, which basically means that the folks that you're out there talking to, we just really don't necessarily know who they support. It's sort of a broad section of the electorate that aren't the strong Republicans or the strong Democrats. We just really have no idea. So it's more that it's called a persuasion universe, but so that's that phase. I'm going to actually have a slide for each of these. So let me go through them one at a time. So if you're doing persuasion canvassing, so if you go out early or you're volunteering for a campaign before voting has begun in the fall, your real goal is to learn who are the supporters, who are the opponents, and who's undecided. And when you frame it that way, it's actually much easier because you're literally just the absolute goal is pretty straightforward. The most valuable thing is somebody to tell you like, oh yeah, we're Democrats, we vote for Democrats, or we haven't decided who we're going to vote for. Like we're going to do our research in the final days, or we're Republicans. Just that feedback from them about their partisan affiliation is really valuable data. If you were sent to a door and you're knocking it at that phase, because when there are people that tell us they're undecided, we want to, the campaign wants to focus on targeting those people and having more follow-up conversations to persuade them. If they say they're supporters, then they are part of the supporter universe that we want to make sure gets out and votes. So that's an important sort of element, is you're not having a lot of persuasion conversations. And if you're not great at being persuasive, the very basics of just getting those IDs is actually an important thing. A lot of that sets up what is called the get out the vote phase of canvassing. So if you canvass in October or November, you will almost certainly be doing get out the vote canvassing. And this is really the most effective time to be talking to voters. It's not the only time to be talking to voters, but it is both the easiest and the most important. And you're going primarily to the households of folks that if they vote are likely going to vote for Democrats, and talking to them, make sure they have a plan to get to the polls. So it's very easy. You're not being confrontational. It's just, have you thought about when you're going to vote in the upcoming election, early, by mail? Do you have all the information you need? Thank you so much for, doing your civic duty and voting. And it is effective. This is where those 7% per conversation statistics come from. You don't have to be persuasive. You don't have to be a policy expert. You don't have to try to talk somebody into picking Biden, who's, a sane good leader over a fascist con artist. Like, it's just maddening to have to do that. That's not sort of the main goal of Get Out the Vote canvassing. A concept called deep canvassing is what is like actual persuasive canvassing, which is, can both be really effective to mobilize disengaged voters that have just given up, like voting is not going to make a difference, so they should just, there's no reason to do it, or who are torn between who they want to vote for. It involves a lot of listening. This is a type of canvassing that is not necessarily suitable for beginners. It takes some training. There's definitely like some strategy to it. But this isn't generally the canvassing that you will be out there doing if you haven't canvassed before, and if you're attending this as somebody that's kind of nervous about canvassing. But I'm just giving you kind of the landscape here. And the last one is voter registration. There are some voter registration efforts that go door to door. That's usually community-based in areas where people are more likely to vote for Democrats if they do register and actually go vote, underrepresented communities. And that's not necessarily a super challenging kind of canvassing, but it definitely requires like good training about the way to go about voter registration. So, just to back up, if you are new to canvassing and you sign up and you're probably going to do it in the fall, the type of canvassing that you will likely end up doing is Get Out the Vote canvassing, where you'll be talking mostly to folks that are supportive, their values aligned, they might not be paying much attention, but you're primarily focused on nudging them to vote, making sure they have the information about the upcoming election. And the last thing that I'm going to do, and then I'm going to hand it off to Marj, is taking sort of my motivational pitch about why canvassing is easy and fun and effective and really rewarding for the canvasser. And this is just a 3-minute video that hopefully gets that same sort of spirit across.
In a world that seems peaceful and quiet, you will face your darkest fears. Whatever you do, don't look behind you.
Oh, it's just the mailman.
In a town where something isn't quite right.
Dangerous there.
When you're all alone.
You know this is concrete, right?
Things will never be.
Come on, I'm just knocking doors. It's not that scary.
Well, it's a little scary.
Sure, I was nervous at first, but now I got this.
But
We'll show you how it's done.
We've been volunteering for 15 years. Talking to voters is how we win.
Talking to people and getting fresh air feels great.
The training took, 30 minutes? And then we were ready to go. You'll get a script and whatever materials you need.
You'll keep track of everything on an app on your phone, and it's really easy to use. You'll go to specific homes on a list where we know that most voters are Democrats, but they may need a nudge to actually go vote.
So many elections come down to just a few votes. Just asking them if they made a plan is so important. It really does make them more likely to vote.
A lot of potential voters need that personal connection to get past all the noise and negativity.
Most folks are just busy and don't follow politics every day. Showing up and getting them to think about voting is sometimes all that it takes.
An older woman told me that she was going to vote because I showed up at her door. No one ever knocked her door before.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are kind of scared or intimidated by it, but it's way easier than I thought. You don't need to be a policy expert or anything. It's just about making sure Democrats know when they plan to vote and giving them the right info.
And if you do run into a Republican, they're usually nice and just tell you. And that data helps us know who's who, and then you don't have to go back to that house.
I don't want to wake up the day after the election and wish I did more.
I never thought I'd knock doors, but I ask myself, am I doing everything I can to fight for my values?
Following the polls just makes you feel helpless. The polls don't vote. It's what we do that matters.
Because I know that every time that I get out to knock doors, we get a few more votes, and it really adds up.
If I'm concerned about what's going on, if I really believe that democracy is under attack, I need to step up. So I did.
I signed up. Come join us.
We said yes.
Knocking doors is one of the most important things I've ever done.
Join us.
All right, well, that is the recruitment pitch, and Marj is gonna take over and talk all about training and the actual mechanics of how you knock doors.
All right, thank you, Reid. That video is really inspiring. It's great. And it made me think of when you were talking about that anger and hope equal action. I think Jessica on Chop Wood, Carry Water said that someone had told her that you can't wring your hands while you're rolling up your sleeves. And that's what, this is really about. Roll up your sleeves and get in there and do something. So that's a great video. We really appreciate that. And next, we're going to have someone who is right in the middle of all of this canvassing. Marj Halperin is a longtime member of Indivisible Chicago Alliance's board. She's a co-leader of Blue Beginnings, which hosts the monthly political meeting at the Hideout. It's a mixer. She has decades of experience as a journalist and communications consultant and has served in several local and state government reform positions. You can hear her political commentary weekly on the WGN radio podcast, The Mincing Rascals. And Marj has worked with ICA, the Indivisible Chicago Alliance, to put together in-person training and has graciously agreed to compress their 90-minute training, which includes, some practice things and things like that, into a 45-minute how-to presentation. So thanks very much, Marj, and we'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Screen sharing is not my forte, so let me get the hard part over with now. And move this out of the way so you don't have to look at my tabs. All right, well, thanks for being here. We're happy to train anywhere and everywhere, though the in-person one is a great opportunity. So if you see some of those dates coming up, and we have one with Indivisible Evanston, July 17th, I urge you to do that also. But in the meantime, we're here because, as Reid said, knocking on doors is our most effective tool. He's given you the stats for how helpful it really is. So I'm going to skip through that. But just as a comparison, I'm going to tell you that knocking on doors has a 20% contact rate and phone banks more like 5%. So it seems like a big investment of time, but you will have more conversations. And it certainly is worth doing that. So you hear that from a lot of people, and you've heard it before. You heard it a couple times tonight. And then the other thing you hear from your friends and probably your inner voice is that you don't want to do it. You're an introvert. You find it intrusive. For a lot of folks, it can be a stretch to go knock on a stranger's door. But we've given you some encouragement, and I'll continue to do so. You're going to learn today why we canvass and what to expect and some skills for the doorstep. And in the end, we want to get you over your concerns about it and help you be comfortable and confident when you get to the door. The first thing you need to know is it's a lot easier than you think. The typical canvassing encounter is only 2 or 3 minutes. You're not getting into a big, deep conversation about issues. You're not trying to persuade people to change their views. I'm going to say this repeatedly. We don't knock on the doors of Trumpies. If you get somebody accidentally, you thank them for the time and walk away. So you're not standing at the doorstep to argue. You don't need any specific knowledge, any detailed information. You keep the conversation pretty broad generally and focus on your feelings and your voters' feelings. For example, you could say our candidate supports women's access to abortion, is against tax cuts for the rich, is for better education funding. That kind of general statement that checks the boxes. You see what they respond to, and if they want to talk more, you will. So by design, we're going to like-minded voters, and we want to increase our voter turnout. Almost everybody who canvasses for the first time is surprised at how nice people are. Sometimes you get somebody rude or more likely impatient. They might close the door when they learn who you are, but more often they won't open it in the first place. And I think the reason people are so respectful is that you're standing on their doorstep, right? Their neighbors can see how they behave. They don't want to be rude or cause a scene on their own front porch. Neither do you. So if they're not happy, you thank them and step away. But really, unpleasant encounters are very rare. It's an easy conversation. And I want you to know that it's even a little easier when you come with Indivisible Chicago. When we organize the Canvas outings, and I'll tell you in a bit how to find them, but you'll get them through our updated calendar. You will have carpool arrangements. We'll ask if you need a ride, if you can give a ride, if you plan to drive by yourself. We'll ask how much experience you have. If you're a newbie, you'll be our top priority, and we'll make sure to pair you with someone who is experienced. You'll have a group leader there on site on Canvas Day to answer any questions and to solve any problems that you might have. Our main goal is for you to have a good experience. We want you to come back. Yes, so you might canvas once, but then we want you to come back and canvas again. Don't let that intimidate you either. If you're new and carpooling, your leader will arrange for your ride and pair you with that experienced canvasser. Most rookies will stick with a partner for 5 or 10 doors, and then they are fine going off on their own. So our objectives as canvassing, and I won't go into too much detail because Reid talked about these kinds of canvassing, but the number one thing is to make an impression, to introduce our candidate if they're not aware. And of course, we're not necessarily talking about Biden here, but we often will campaign for, in addition to the Biden-Harris ticket, for some down ballot candidates. We do this particularly in Michigan, where we have found that people who are comfortable with the down ballot candidates that they know and recognize from their community, they're more likely to punch a straight Democratic ticket and go all the way up. So they might tell you, sure, as I heard from a lot of people in Benton Harbor on Sunday, love Joey Andrews, not so sure about Biden. Well, stick with your love for Joey Andrews, stay in the Democratic lane, and we'll tell you why you should vote for Biden. So a lot of conversations go like that. So we want to make sure they have a sense. But the main thing at the beginning, at this time anyway in the campaign, is identifying the voter. And I want to be clear about that. So we have a list of who we think are likely Democratic voters, but maybe they've changed their mind, or in this race, they're not so sure, as I just mentioned. So we want to identify those who can vote with us, are likely to, or leaning toward us. And those who are against us, we don't knock on their door again, like you saw in the video. As we get closer to Election Day, we are doing that Get Out the Vote, the GOTV campaign that Reid talked about. I'm not going to go any further into deep canvassing than Reid did, other than to say there is an excellent TED Talk on it if you'd like to learn more. It's really interesting to see how you can have a personal conversation on somebody's doorstep with a stranger, although Reid explained partly why that happens, I think. So let's say you decide to give it a try. You sign up for a shift, you show up at the campaign office at the appointed time, and here's what's going to happen. First, you're going to get a briefing from a campaign staffer. This could be 10 or 20 minutes of information that is meant to be all you need to know. The campaign will usually call it training. It's not maybe as detailed as the training that you're listening to right now. But when it's good, the first timers will really get everything they need to know. It's really not that complicated. I think you're starting to see that. But if it falls short, that's what we're for, through our training and through our group leaders who will be there with you, helping you get the confidence even before you show up. So here's what the campaign will give you. There's a list of tools that you're going to get. One is the campaign literature, door cards, door hangers, some kind of lit. You'll give it to the people you talk to, and you'll leave it behind for the people who aren't home. You might carry for several candidates. As I mentioned, in Michigan, we're carrying for some down ballot candidates as well as for Biden and Harris. So you'll use it to talk to the candidates, and it'll have some talking points. It'll amount to something of a cheat sheet for you while you talk to the voter. If it's been a while since you've canvassed, and we're not good at a show of hands in this format, but I know there'll be some folks who have canvassed before, but not recently. You might be looking for, and probably will not find, the old school turf map that we used to get on paper that looked like this. You're also going to look for a voter list. Again, the old school voter list was names and information about the voters that looked like this. So that might be familiar to you if you've canvassed, say, in 2020, but not since, or 2016. But what we use now is an app on your phone called Minivan. VAN stands for Voter Action Network, by the way, and that's the database that we use to pull the information. Mini, because it's there on your phone. So you can see that you'll still get the information that you need. We advise that you download the Minivan app ahead of time, create an account, sign in before you show up, get a little familiar with the app as well. But you don't want to waste time doing that in the campaign office. So Minivan has a list also, and it looks like this. It's specific to the person you're talking to. If there's more than one person in the household, you'll get it for each person in the household. It helps you gather the information and refine the database. So in Michigan, especially where they have an open primary and you don't declare whether you're a Democrat or Republican when you vote in primaries, we use other factors to develop the list that we think are likely Democratic voters. So we need you to confirm that that's who you're talking to. You'll have a script here along with the name, very simple script. The simpler, the better. Are they with us or not? If you say, well, we'll come back to that in 1 second. After the check boxes, you'll see at the top that we have, I couldn't reach this contact, and that most often is the thing you're gonna use because a lot of times people are not home. And if you check, I couldn't reach this contact, it'll tell you why. Oops, I'm on the other screen. It'll tell you why, and you can say maybe they moved or they're just not home. And we'll talk a little more about those options in a minute. So before you set out, you should be looking over the campaign literature. And if you need to, ask questions about the kind of neighborhood you're in, what issues are important locally. And this is a big help when you're out on the street, because I know when we were in Benton Harbor 2 years ago, there was a controversy over plans to close a high school. And our local candidate was opposed to closing the school. He graduated from there. And when he talked to us about it, then we go knock on doors and you can reference the high school and everybody knew what we were talking about. So you want to know what are local issues that you otherwise wouldn't have information about. You want to be informed about the script. And I call it a script, by the way. It's really an outline. You want to look at it ahead of time, understand the question so you know what data the campaign is looking for you to gather, but say it in your own words. You don't have to keep looking at your phone to read the words directly. You want to sound like a real person. So say it in your own words, but just be sure you have enough speech there to check the boxes that the campaign is looking for. I will also add one last thing, and that is that we're in a world of social media. So before you head out, we love those group shots. While you're out, take a picture of you and your buddy at the door as you knock, without disclosing the face of the person who comes to the door. But keep in mind that if didn't end up on social media. It didn't happen. But more than that, we like to say that your friends are watching. So when you say, I was in Benton Harbor today, and here's me knocking on doors, people say, oh, that looks easy. You know, if Kitty can do it, I can do it. So that's where we want your work at home to continue when you're all done knocking on doors. So let's talk a little bit about the specifics. Let's not bump our screen unnecessarily. So here's some things we want you to do. Of course, you're going to dress for comfort. Wear good walking shoes. Take a look at the weather, decide what it's going to be and how you want to prepare. But also think about who you'll be talking to and where you'll be when you decide what to wear. If you have a campaign button, wear it. I have some Biden-Harris earrings that I like to wear when I'm knocking on the door, but you identify yourself as part of the campaign. But also think about looking local, for lack of a better phrase. So if you're canvassing in Milwaukee, don't wear your Cubs hat. Don't wear your Indivisible Chicago gear either. Now, I want to be clear here because people always have questions about this. We're not ashamed of being from Chicago. We have a really good answer, actually, if the subject comes up. I will say to people, yes, I'm from Chicago. And the reason I'm here is because what happens in your state impacts me, my family, my community, and in fact, the whole country. It rarely comes up, though, in my experience. And if people are unhappy that you've come from Chicago, they probably aren't going to vote for our guys anyway. And if they are with us, they thank you for making the trip. So don't worry about that. You want to be sure to get to headquarters in time because, as I told you, you got to have some conversations and get your briefing there. So be there in time for that. Be sure that you give your phone number and exchange with your group leader, your walking partner, of course, because you're going to want to text while you're hitting your houses, and the campaign organizer. So if you have any questions, you can reach them while you're out on the street. Bring water, bring snacks. If you'll need them, look out for bathrooms. This is no small thing. You're going to be out for 3 hours. So on your way in, look for your Starbucks, your Home Depot, Heavy Woods, if that works for you. When I was in Benton Harbor, I eyed the woods, but we ended up finding porta potties out at the airport, and that worked just fine. So you just never know what you're going to find, but we all like to plan ahead and be sure we're comfortable. So now you're at the door. We tell you to ring, then knock. You try each door twice. When you knock in, they know there's an actual person sitting there, and you'd be surprised at how often that brings people to the door when ringing the bell does not, or even barking dogs don't sometimes. They know you're there, but when you knock, you're a little more insistent, and it can help. Then take a step back from the door. Smile, because you're on candid camera most of the time now. We got those Ring and Nest cameras at the door, or sometimes you'll just see the shades or the curtains part just a little bit, and they're looking to see who you are. So the days of clipboards are over, but you're holding lit, whatever you're holding, put it down at your side. Don't announce that you're coming from a campaign right away. Look at the camera and smile and look friendly. That's the best thing you can do to get them to open the door. When they come to the door, you want to be friendly. You introduce yourself. You can, by the way, talk to anybody at the door and give them the lit, but you are only recording data for the voter on your list. It doesn't work to have someone else tell you what they think. When you get down to issues, use the lit, hold it in front of you and show them. These are the things the Biden campaign has accomplished, and then hand it to them, let them keep it. If they're not there, you'll leave it behind. Sometimes if I have time, I'll scribble in the margin, sorry, I missed you, because then they know an actual person was there. Takes a little time. You may or may not have time for that, but always leave it. It's illegal to leave it in the mailbox because it didn't go through the Postal Service. I like to roll it up and stick it under the handle. So picture one of those lever kind of handles. When you roll it up and stick it under there, it's going to stay. I'll do that on the inside of the door if I can. If I can't, I'll roll it up and stick it between the doorknob and the door jamb, and it will stay there. You could shove it into a crack, but it usually falls out when you do that. And the last thing we want is the face of our candidate all over the sidewalk in the street for people to step on and complain about litter. So secure your lit and move on. So I want to talk about identifying the voter a little more, because it's good to know when they're not for us. We want every voter to be for us, but we don't want to waste our time at the doors. So what you're doing right now is cleaning the list for those who will come for the GOTV portion in the fall. So let's eliminate those folks who are Trumpies, those folks who are accidentally on our list, and narrow it down to the ones who really can vote for our candidates. So in the fall, we're as efficient as possible. Say thanks for your time, move on. If the voter is undecided, here's where you get to try your charm and your persuasion to make productive conversation. Listen to what they say. Listen to their complete explanation. So I asked a voter in Benton Harbor the other day, what is your major concern? He said immigration. And I said, what about immigration exactly? Because Biden has done several things. Some please the left, some please the right. What's your issue? I didn't blurt out anything about the defund ICE or open borders, or I didn't know what to say because I want to know what he cared about. And what he cared about was the person who was at the DMV when he applied to renew his license, who spoke with a heavy accent and he couldn't understand them. Well, that's not a federal policy. I said, no, that's about the state, Secretary of State. They probably need better training for their employees. He agreed. And then I said, but Biden's position, and then I went on to talk about our issue. So don't get too far out in front. Listen to what they're concerned about, then engage on that issue. And if they say they don't have any issues, share yours. I'm here instead of being with my family on a nice sunny day because I'm concerned about women's access to control their own health decisions and have direct access to abortion. That might be my issue. But be careful, because there are places where your passion for abortion rights or gun control will not go over too well. We're canvassing outside of the Chicago bubble. So those who vote for our candidates might not agree with our positions. Let's not be so dogmatic that they have to vote for our candidates for our reasons. We just want their vote, right? So you need to listen to them. If your thing is healthcare, talk about women's access to healthcare, but maybe don't mention the word abortion until you have a little back and forth with them. And if you're talking with a strong supporter, we have an ask that follows. The script in the campaign will tell you the ask. It might be toward election time. It's going to be, do you have a plan to vote? Are you going to vote in person, early vote? We help them focus on their plan, but maybe getting a yard sign or maybe signing up to volunteer. If you can knock on doors like me, but there's a lot of office work that we need too. Can you volunteer? So the script will tell you what they want you to ask. Let's talk a little bit about recording the voter data. So I said earlier, you need to record data for the voter whose name is on your list. And if there are several voters in a household, you'll ask, oh, is Charlie home? Oh, he votes like me. Yeah, I know, but the campaign asked me to just ask him directly. Could you just get him for a minute? And if they say no, you'll say, that's okay, someone will come back for Charlie later. And usually Charlie appears at that moment in the conversation. So make sure you're entering the data for the person that you're looking for. And this is where it gets just a little confusing. If you can't talk with a voter, and you'll get about 20–25% of your houses, you'll talk to someone. So the majority, you won't. But how you tell the campaign what happened is very important. Was the person not home? Did they move? Did they refuse to talk to you? Sometimes you need to think about what that means. When you mark someone not home, you're telling the campaign, go back and try that voter another time, like Charlie, my example. But if you say they refused, you're telling the campaign, don't come back here. This is a person who is not supportive, not maybe hostile. You don't want to talk to them. So if you have any doubt about their reaction, or you think another conversation could be helpful, write not home. So maybe your list has you looking for a 29-year-old female. A middle-aged man comes to the door. She doesn't want to talk to you and slams the door. Refused, but not by her. So she's not home. And we're going to go back and hope that guy's not there the next time we knock. Here's one thing we don't do. Hi, do you have a minute? Can I just ask you a question? We don't do that because the answer to that is going to be no. Nobody thinks they have time. They don't know you. Just go right into your pitch. And once you start talking about, so hi, I'm a volunteer. My name is Marj. I'm a volunteer at the Biden-Harris campaign. And then you keep going on your script. If they ask questions and you get into discussing issues, it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to look at the lit and say, oh, that's right here. Or to tell them, you can call the campaign office or check their website. That information is right here on the literature and you can hand it to them. You don't have to know everything. You just be a normal person. You're knocking on doors as a volunteer. I'm just a volunteer. We haven't talked about that. Please call the campaign to find out. Or I'll have someone call you and you can make a note and have the campaign follow up with that person on the issue they're interested in. One other thing is a lot of local communities will have a no soliciting ordinance, and then you'll see those no soliciting signs on a lot of doorways. They don't apply to us. We're not selling anything. Soliciting is selling, not talking. Our First Amendment rights are protected. And it makes sense if you think that those laws are passed by politicians who like canvassers to go knock on doors. They're not going to make that illegal, and they do not. I do want to note that there are some safety precautions that you should consider. Be aware of your surroundings, just as you do anytime you are out walking. Look out for, barking aggressive dogs or excessive MAGA signage on the lawn, although in my experience, we still have voters in a MAGA household who could be with us. They're not the person who planted the sign. And if I can make a gendered comment, in my experience, in a typical family situation, it's the man of the household who puts the MAGA sign out and the women and children who vote with us. But that's just an informal summary. I see Reid is agreeing with me. That's just what happens sometimes. But look out for what's around. Don't ever go into the house. And people can be so nice. They want you to just step inside. Come on in. Use your best judgment about this. But remember, you have a buddy who's probably across the street doing the even number of households while you're on the odd side, and they're going to be looking for you. So it's fine to say to that person, I'm canvassing with someone else. They're going to look for me and I need to stay on the porch. They'll understand. But it's the safest place for you to be. I've said before, we don't argue, and we don't criticize. We don't say negative things about other people or other positions or policies. Maybe you mention a convicted felon here or there, but otherwise we don't want any unpleasantness. It doesn't work. It doesn't work to argue with people. We're informing and educating them and ourselves about what their positions and concerns are. That's an honest dialogue, and that's what we're doing at the doorstep. If someone does want to argue with you, whether it's somebody passing you on the street or someone at the door, the important thing is to be calm, lower the volume, take a step back from the person who's questioning you, avoid anything confrontational, avoid direct eye contact, and just step away, bow out. Thank them for their time. I'm not here to argue with you. I respect your opinion. Goodbye. So a couple more details. I've alluded to this before. Your typical shift is about 3 hours. You'll have 50 doors or so. Don't forget, it also takes time for that briefing in the office. campaign office. You need travel time, not just to the campaign office, but from the campaign office to the neighborhood where you will be knocking on doors, your turf, as we call it in the lingo. I want to stress, I think it's important to go out in pairs. Some people who are very experienced will go out by themselves, but especially for first timers, you should plan to go out in pairs. Every now and then, and this is rare, but we have experienced a campaign staffer who is super eager to boost their door count. They want you to go out by yourself, take your own 50 doors, and try to push you away from a walking partner. But you have a right to have it, to have a partner with you. You need to stand up for that, be clear. I'm new, I was promised that I would get a partner, and your group leader, when you come out on an Indivisible campaign, will be there to support you and make sure that you get all the tools and permissions that you need. I want to go back to this percentage. I told you 25% is generally the number of conversations we'll have. So you look at 50 doors and you think, wow, 20%, that's not that many conversations. But it adds up. I get 20 doors, you get 20 doors, conversations, Kitty gets 20, Reid gets 20, and you can see how it's a numbers game. And that when we're all out on the street, we're building the database for the fall. So don't worry about the conversations you don't have. Focus on the ones you do have. And that's not difficult advice to follow because it's so rewarding to be able to talk with the voters and give yourself a picture of the people behind the stats. You're looking at polls, your hands are wringing. How can they be unsure about this or that? They don't like Biden's stand on this policy. Trump is worse. How do they? We sit home and have those conversations with ourselves and with the CNN reporters, right? But when you talk to a real person, you have an understanding of the nuance and the concerns of real people. I had a woman clasp my hands through a broken door the other day. I lost my job. I don't know how to pay the rent next month. Like you, until you have that conversation, you don't understand. But now I see why she doesn't think Biden has done enough for her. And I had some information for her. Can't get her a job, but you have that conversation and you understand it better. So this is why I canvass, because it gives me that kind of understanding and confidence about how we are helping people. One study says we win one vote out of every 10 or 14 conversations. I just saw a study the other day that said we boost overall turnout by as much as 6%. Now, you know how close this race is, especially in the battleground states. So 6% is a winning margin. 3% is a winning margin. Was it Michigan in 2020 where we won by 3 votes per precinct or something like that? Like the numbers are crazy tight. So you are making a difference when you come with us to these battleground states that have such slim margins. So it's a big speech and thanks for listening. I'll join Reid for some questions, but I want to tell you that we have a lot of resources for you. A lot of the studies and the TED Talk and some other things we have linked at this site that is only for people who have been through our training, indivisiblechicago.com/trained. And of course, now that you've gotten your briefing and you're not scared anymore and you're anxious to hear what actual voters have to say to you, you can sign up for our upcoming canvasses in Michigan and Wisconsin at indivisiblechicago.com/calendar. And with that, I will relinquish my screen if I can figure out how. Hello.
Thanks so much, Marj and Reid. If anybody has any questions for the speakers, please put them in the chat. I'll start off with one that I answered to the best of my ability, but I'll let you two also answer these. One is how far away from Chicago is the canvassing, and is it usually over the weekends?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the whole idea with our campaign is that wherever you live in the Chicago area, you're about an hour from either Wisconsin or Michigan. Those of you in Evanston, obviously pretty close to Wisconsin. I live in the South Loop, so I go to Michigan because it's closer for me. So you're an hour, hour and a half away from where you can really make a difference. And in Wisconsin, we're going to Kenosha, Racine. Sometimes we venture a little farther for an overnight if we have people who will host us. But generally, we're in Kenosha and Racine, and those very important canvassing area in Wisconsin.
Okay. Reid,
you asked the second half. I didn't answer the second half.
Oh, it was usually over the weekends.
Oh, yeah. Usually on the weekends. Mm-hmm. As we get closer, we'll do more during the week.
Okay. Reid, what locations might your organization be going to?
I'll mention it very briefly because I'm really here to, I think the Indivisible Chicago Alliance canvassing is going to be the best fit for most folks here. What we do to answer that question at Progressive Turnout Project is a paid canvassing program that's really focused on rural towns in Wisconsin and Michigan. It's a great fit if you have like a cousin in Connecticut that may want to spend like a week in Michigan or Wisconsin, and that's where the payment comes in, is because it defrays really all of their travel and hotel costs without having to tap into something. But it's also a program that's starting up in August, is 7 days a week. It's flexible. People can do it any time of day. And so, you know, I expect that's not the best option for most folks here, but if you I'll throw the website with more information in the chat, just because if you do know folks in deeply blue areas that want to come into Wisconsin or Michigan, it actually might be easier for them to do it will be easier for them to do our canvassing than to like hang out all week just to then go with you in the weekend, unless they want to see you all week and then take advantage of that trip. You kind of get the idea. So.
Okay, thanks. So for the upcoming ICA canvasses, Marj, what kinds of information are you collecting right now at this stage in the process?
So this is a voter ID process. Both Wisconsin and Michigan have a need for identifying voters. I think Reid knows more about Wisconsin than I do, but I said earlier, Michigan has an open primary. So when I moved from Michigan to Illinois, the first time they said, "Are you a Democrat or Republican?" I'm like, "None of your business. Why would I tell you?" Well, because that's how we get our ballots here. But in Michigan and Wisconsin, they're open. So in Wisconsin, I do know this because I volunteer on election day. It's one single ballot that has Republicans and Democrats. It's a way that gets people to undervote because they can't tell. Sometimes they double vote, overvote is what I want to say. So you end up voting for Republicans for one race and Democrats for another, but it's primary, you know, it's a mess. So they don't declare in either state. So again, we're guessing when we knock on the door, there's reason to think they have a history of voting for Democrats, or maybe the more sophisticated database cross-references with factors like, do they listen to NPR? Are they subscribers to the New York Times, wine clubs? I don't know. There's different factors that convince you that they're going to be more progressive at college education, some other things. So they're making their best guess. But since they don't know, we have to tell them. We have to directly ask the person, are you supporting the Democratic ticket? And if we then say strong supporter, leaning supporter, undecided, leaning opponent, strongly for our opponent. So that tells us whether to come back again and how to have a conversation with them.
All right, thanks. Betsy asked, do we know if other groups are door knocking in the same places?
Yes and no. Sometimes you'll see somebody from Move On across the street, or someone from, you know, some unions. SEIU does a lot of canvassing, especially here in Illinois. So we don't always know, but there is a concerted effort to coordinate through the Democratic Party. So when you go through the campaign office, the Democratic campaign office, you have a better chance of having all your activities coordinated. And Indivisible is part of a growing coalition that was just launched yesterday in Evanston at Sketchbook. Maybe some of you were there, I don't know, called the Statewide Oh, God.
Operation Swing State.
Operation Swing State. Operation Swing State. So we're coordinating with Public Action. We're coordinating with the Turnout Project. We're coordinating with as many groups as we can. Jan Chakowski that sends a lot of folks up to Wisconsin. Her team is part of it too. So we're making as best an effort as we can to coordinate on this side before we go out of state.
And let me tack onto that too, because I agree with everything Marj said, but I think there's also, it's become very easy in recent years through like just basically database integration. I don't know how else to say it. So, you know, basically all the data generally from all the progressive and Democratic groups gets shared on the back end. And that's an example. Our program in the fall, it's a totally different program. But when somebody has a conversation with the voter and the voter says, like, basically all the data that we get from that conversation with the voter overnight gets synced to the Democrat. So we're not directly in our program, like Marj's group, they're actually getting their lists from the Democratic Party's coordinated program. We're not. We're using a totally separate database. And despite that, the data gets synced in instantly. So if somebody says they're voting by mail, you know, the next time the canvassing lists are refreshed in the state of Michigan, it's like that was a conversation through their program. So we really just don't need to be worried about different groups canvassing and overlapping. It's if you were part of any of the canvassing for Sean Casten and Lauren Underwood in 2018, like that's what winning looks like. If we ever get to a point where they're like, we got it, we're voting, they start to put the like no political canvassing signs up, that's this, you feel like that's probably what winning look. I mean, that's like what we want to get to that point, unfortunately. So I don't know how else to say it, but more canvassing good.
It's a little different with phone banks. So if that question came from somebody who's a frequent phone banker, that's a little more challenging situation to coordinate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mark asked, what are the best days and times when you find more voters are available at home?
Reid, do you have stats on that? I could give my impression, but
yeah, I mean, the data does still show that evenings are a little bit better. It's actually not that different on weekdays or weekends. And after I mean, it can depend on neighborhoods, but in certain areas where more folks are working from home now, you can have pretty good contact rates on like a Tuesday at 10 in the morning. But you know, the best times do end up being in the like 4 to 6 p.m. where people are home, they're cooking dinner. And, you know, the reason that a lot of canvas launches happen on the weekend is more logistical for the campaign and volunteers than it is about when folks are home. So I love canvassing like weekdays in the afternoon because it's just like everybody's home.
Is that your experience too, Marj?
yeah, I find Sundays better than Saturdays. People have a lot of errands and stuff to do on Saturdays. Sunday after church, I wouldn't go before noon on Sunday, although we had a morning shift out in Benton Harbor the other day. But I felt like a lot of people were home. I was surprised that our contact rate for me and my canvas buddy was just under 25%. I felt like I talked to half the people. I just felt like a lot of people were home. It seemed better than on a Saturday. It's my own anecdotal experience.
Okay. Candace asked whether the van data is consolidated. I think that was already answered, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Melissa asked, should we just sign up for one group to volunteer for the same event? Specifically talking about the July Wisconsin canvassing.
Do I understand that question? We have one sign up link. So wherever you see the information, it should take you to the same Mobilize is the format that we use. It's the launchpad that we use. So it should be the same link wherever you go. Someone else may be running another canvas that day that I don't know about, but the one that we're running jointly, there's only one link. Wherever you find it, it's the right one.
Right. But it would not make sense to also sign up with the WisDems for the same Saturday. Right. They're often, because the things all get coordinated out of the Democratic office.
Yes.
So there's no point signing up both with ICA and with WisDems for the same day, for example.
Right.
Melissa, did that answer your question? Yes, thank you. Okay, we're good. Let's see. I just a couple questions people have asked me that didn't end up in the chat. Does minivan work on an older mobile phone?
How old? Would be
Well,
the
yeah.
question. So I think the question is, if you have bandwidth, if your phone is already full and won't let you load up another, if your memory is all full and you can't load a new app, that would be one problem. And again, we recommend that you do it in advance. Don't wait till you get to the campaign office and find out for some reason it's wonky on your phone. But most relatively recent phones are just fine. Do you find any concerns about that?
I have an awesome phone. It's like an iPhone 13 Max, and that's most of my canvassing with my phone. I don't think that most folks are not going to have an issue with that. There's not a lot of compatibility issues. I mean, it obviously has to be a smartphone, but those things only last so long. So, there are very few people that have had their same smartphone for like 7 years now at this point. So it's the kind of thing that you can troubleshoot, or if you're not super tech savvy, Marj and anybody on the ICA team, or certainly like a field organizer, once you get there, can absolutely make sure it's on your phone as long as you have that. So bigger issues, make sure your battery's charged, and if your phone has low power mode can be your best friend too. But
good
yeah,
tip.
Bring a portable battery if you have it. I don't know why I didn't mention that, but absolutely.
Yeah. Very good tip. Reid, I don't want to get into the weeds, as they say, but I am curious about how that 7% increase is measured. Do you have a quick explanation?
Yeah, I mean, the way we measure the effectiveness of all forms of direct voter contact for specifically boosting turnout, so get out the vote canvassing is what that is in reference to, is through what's called a randomized controlled trial. And that is the same way that vaccines are tested and pharmaceuticals are tested, where to do it with door-to-door canvassing, is essentially there are going to be some voters in households that are put in what's called a control group, and then you create a universe of doors that you would like to knock that look statistically identical in terms of things like the age, likelihood to vote, partisanship lean, demographics of the people in those. And so you want two groups that are statistically as close to identical as possible and large. And the control group are homes that we might ordinarily want to have knocked, but like for the purposes of research, we do not knock those doors. And then we try to knock all of the doors in the treatment group. And then you look, because the outcome is easy to measure, is we can go back into the voter file and say who actually voted. So this control group, maybe 50% of people vote. And then in the treatment group, you can see that maybe 52% of people voted. And then there's you have statistical confidence about how likely that was to occur by chance, and how much of it was how likely it was to be because of what's called the intervention or the door knocking. And for large groups, you can have very rigorous confidence based on those statistics if the experiment's set up well. And it sort of actually makes one of my earlier points for me that it's hard to knock the door. Marj mentions a 25% contact rate, which means, you have to do numerous passes through a neighborhood to have conversations with more than half the people or the majority of the people. And, that is what canvassing is up against, is just that contact rate. So it's the most effective thing that we can do, but it's really those conversations where you see that big bump. And it does include that number does include two other factors, which is the smaller benefit of the literature that you leave behind in the doors of people that don't answer. And then if you talk to one person in the household and they has a great conversation, other members of that household are actually also more likely to vote. And some studies will measure that residual. The 7% that I reference includes that spillover effect to other members of the household. So probably can go beyond that, because you can only really know at the household level. But I mean, they have other people in their lives that aren't at their household. It could be their kid that might be in college that they were like, oh, you know what, I'm going to vote, and I got to remember to remind my son to vote and cast his mail ballot. So statistics is the short answer.
Well, thanks. It
You know,
sounds nice and rigorous. Go ahead, Marj.
Kitty, that reminded me of one other point. I said, you know, you might knock on a door where there's a MAGA sign, but you might not knock on a door where there's a Biden sign. And people are always like, oh, why are we passing them up? They're Democrats. Well, maybe someone has already talked to them. So we really stick with the doors and the voters whose names we have on our list. We have to trust that the list produced for you is a logical and important target list, and don't try to freelance and, well, they got a Biden sign, so I'm gonna knock on their door. You don't have anywhere to put that data because they're not on your list in the minivan.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, well, we don't seem to have any more questions. I guess we're ready to move on. Back to you, Candace.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Marj and Reid. That is fantastic information. That really, really helpful and useful. And now that we've heard from our slick experts, we thought we'd have some sharing from a couple of our members who have done canvassing and have them share their experiences as new and experienced canvassers. Nancy Bruski is a long-term canvasser. She's a clinical social worker specializing in early childhood. She began her political activism as a Get Clean for Jean girl in 1968. She must have been extremely young when Gene McCarthy was running for president. I never heard that Get Clean for Jean girl. I love that. But she's been involved in local community organizations for years, and she's been an active canvasser for years, including in Wisconsin, Florida, Iowa, and Indiana. She's always been passionate about social justice and has wanted to do her part to bring about a better world and make our country better. So she's going to share her canvassing thoughts and experiences. And then Kathy Johnson, who is part of our Indivisible Evanston leadership team and has been a political activist in one way or another most of her adult life as well, she's also had a long career in higher education administration. And she's going to briefly share her experiences canvassing from the perspective of someone who was a reluctant canvasser and the things that helped her to become more comfortable with canvassing. So Nancy, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm excited to be able to talk a little bit about my experiences. One thing I wanted to mention, though, that I have found, and I was surprised to hear that statistics say that 20 to 25% of the doors somebody's going to answer and you're going to have conversations. That has not been my experience. Frequently, it feels like a lot less than that. But my philosophy is that if I have one really good conversation with a voter, my time was well spent. And I'll tell you why, because I focus on Wisconsin. And in Wisconsin, oh, note my necklace says vote. Love this necklace. I just took it out of my box that it lives in between elections. In Wisconsin, elections are won by usually less than 1%. If anything, if there's an election where somebody wins by more than 1%, they call it a landslide. So if I talk to one voter on that day that I spent 2.5 or 3 hours knocking on doors, but had a really good conversation with that voter, that I'm happy. So I feel some people have complained to me that they don't want to do it because it doesn't feel efficient. Because if you go to the DMV in Wisconsin and you register a bunch of voters, that feels more efficient. Well, that is a great project, and I encourage anybody to participate in registering voters. But it's not enough to register them because they also have to vote. So talking to them at the doors can help them actually get out to vote, and I love doing that. So one thing I also wanted to mention, in Wisconsin, I don't know if this is a nationwide project or not, but I've been learning about this new project that they have called Reach, REACH, and it's an app also that you can download on your phone. And what's cool about it is that it gives you the opportunity that if you knock on a door and the person that you're looking for isn't there, but there's a babysitter there who can vote and is interested, and you have a conversation with that person and they want to vote and they're going to support your person, you can actually get that information into that app so that you can take it back to the people can get it into Van and they can then be reached out to. And that's a big issue for me because I was always very frustrated about that rule that you're not really supposed to talk to somebody who isn't the person you're looking for, because that feels like a waste to me. If there's somebody there that's interested that you can get, as a voter, we want that information to get back to the office. So it's something to think about if you are interested in canvassing and you like to have conversations, find out about that. It's also another app. I haven't done it yet, so the idea of using 2 apps at the same time makes me crazy. I like paper, so I'm not great with all that. But I do think that one way or another, if you get the contact information for people that you happen to meet and talk to who are interested in voting for our people, somebody at that office is going to want that information. So I would encourage people to get it if you happen to knock at that door and the right person isn't there. So I wanted to just share a couple things that I do when I canvass that I think are helpful. Is I comment on their dog, their adorable dog, their great landscaping, anything that I see that could break the ice and build a connection, because that's what I want to do. I want to make a connection. And I think what was said about customizing the script is really important, because you don't want to stand there reading. You want to know what they're what you're expected to find out, put it in your own words, and then have a conversation. So that's really important. And then if somebody isn't so sure what their big issue is, then I will definitely share something that's important to me. And I think that also helps. So I want to just share quickly 3 of my top canvassing experiences. In Wisconsin, felons can vote when they're off paper, which means they fulfilled their parole. But the state doesn't do much of a job of telling people that when they get out of jail. So a lot of times when you're canvassing in Wisconsin, that it can happen that somebody will say, well, I can't vote, or I don't vote. And it's a little awkward, because you certainly don't want to accuse anyone of being a felon. So it takes some energy and effort to figure out how you can get this information across to them. And I've done some work on that. But I did some voter ID canvasses over the last number of years, and I led these canvasses. I had a lot of people coming up to Wisconsin to knock on doors. And one of my canvassers knocked on the door of somebody who was a felon and had been a felon and had been off paper for 20 years, and no one had ever told him that he could vote. And he teared up when my canvasser told him he absolutely could register to vote. And it was this really profound moment and this wonderful experience. So that's another thing that can happen when you're knocking on doors, and it's not going to happen any other way. And it's really important. So that was one of my top experiences of having that experience. And another person that I talked to, a young guy who was playing ball with his nephew outside, and he told me he couldn't vote. And I asked him, and he said that I'm a felon and I can't vote, or something like that. It came up. And I asked him if he was off paper, and he had just gotten off paper, and I told him he could definitely vote, and asked if he wanted to, and I showed him how to go on the app in Wisconsin, which is super easy. And he definitely wanted to register, and I asked him if he would be willing to give me his contact info so I could call him in the fall. This was in the summer, to see if he had to follow up with him. And indeed, the weekend before the election, I called him in the fall. I think it was the 22 election, and I asked him if he had a plan for voting, and he said, I already did. I voted early. Thank you so much. So that was another incredible experience. Another experience I had was I knocked on the door of a Latina woman, a grandmother who was a voter herself, but she wanted her grandson, who was about 20, to register to vote. And she wanted me to talk to him to let him know how he could do that. So she called him. He was in the car on his cell phone, and she handed me the phone so I could talk to her grandson. And I explained to him what he needed to do, and I gave her the information. And I said, your grandmother's going to be very disappointed if you don't follow through. So will you promise me that you're going to register and vote? And he did. So I don't know whether he actually voted, but that was a great experience. And then the last example was an incredible experience I had. One time I was canvassing on my own in Kenosha, and there was a group of young African-American men wearing do-rags out in the backyard of a house and listening to loud music coming out of one of the cars. And I was a little bit uncomfortable, this sort of middle-class older white lady, approaching them, but I decided, what the heck, it's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. I'm just going to walk back there. What's going to happen? So I asked, whether they had driver's licenses first, and they did. And then I mentioned the upcoming congressional elections, because this was 22. They didn't even know what a congressional election was. And I gave them a mini lesson on congressional elections. And I know you're not supposed to say anything negative about anyone, but what I said was, look, I'm getting old and I'm going to be dead. And you guys are going to have to live with decisions made by conservative white guys if you don't consider voting. So you might want to find out who's running. And I've got some literature for you, and you can register and you can vote and you can have some control over who's making decisions in your life. And I gave them, I had these voter ID and voter registration information cards with me. And I handed one to each of them. There were 3 of them. And then one of them said, can I have 3 or 4 more to give to my friends? And I said, absolutely. I felt bad later that I didn't try to get somebody's contact info so I could have followed up with them. But that was also an incredible experience. So these are the kinds of experiences you're not going to get doing a phone bank. It's just not going to happen. These guys weren't in the van and they weren't registered. Or somebody might have been registered at that house because it wasn't an address that I was supposed to go to. But I don't think these guys were. So that was a great experience that I had. And these are the kinds of conversations that you can have when you're knocking on doors that you can't have any other way. And it can be really moving. And it's just, I find it very, very gratifying. So that's my story.
Great. Thanks so much, Nancy. That's fascinating experiences. You should write a book. And I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Johnson, who's going to share her experience.
Hi. So unlike Nancy, I'm normally a bit shy. I can be awkward, like, walking into a party or an event. And so I was very reluctant to canvass. I actually did my first canvassing with Nancy up in Kenosha. Many times going up there and doing exactly what she was describing. So, but anyway, so a couple of things I wanted to say that helped me get comfortable with it over the years. One thing is, sometimes you'll arrive and you'll get handed like stacks of literature, and you won't know exactly what your script is and whatever. And to just make sure you spend time sort of talking yourself down, organizing your literature before you start going door to door, because it's not always grouped. So sometimes you have to collate it yourself. So for me, spending a few minutes getting myself really organized helps a lot before I even start going to the first door. And familiarizing myself again with what my actual purpose is in that particular canvas. So, am I trying to ID voters? And if or am I getting out the vote? Or, and sometimes they're mixed. So I canvassed for Wisconsin primary this spring, and it felt really mixed to me. Was I doing get out the vote? Was I can't, try to be really clear on what your purpose is in that particular canvas. Helps a lot. Make sure you take a backup phone battery. So I was with a partner one time whose phone died, and just make sure you take one of those little backup phone batteries. Again, just sort of being prepared ahead of time, understand your script, organizing your flyers ahead of time. And then the one thing I want to say, if you're new to canvassing, don't be afraid to stay with your partner the first few times you go out. That I did, particularly one of the first times that I went out with ICA. I went with a partner who hadn't done it before. One of us did the minivan stuff and the other one did more of the talking at the door. And we still made it through our entire turf. and talked to everybody in the allotted time frame. And part of that was we were really efficient, right? I was doing all the minivan stuff and answering the questions and whatever, as she was talking to people. And so anyway, don't be afraid to do that, because that, my experience is that you can still be just as efficient, and it's a lot less intimidating. We had at least a couple people on that particular canvas who were Trumpers, you know. One guy started in, "You see my flag, you people don't believe in flags," and you know, just on and on. So it's nice, especially if you're someone like me where you're reluctant. It's nice to be with somebody. You can kind of laugh about it as you walk away. You can cue each other to move. So that was the other piece that I just wanted to share. So those just a couple things. I know we're almost out of time here, so I'll turn it back over to Candace.
Thanks, Kathy. That's it's great to hear your personal experience. And yeah, that backup battery should probably go in everybody's presentation. I just wanted to say a couple things. I'm just put our newsletter sign up link in the chat. We try to keep track of all the canvases that ICA is doing and other people might be doing, you might be interested in. So if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, you'll get links to sign up for canvassing and other volunteer opportunities as well. And then I think Kitty's put the link in. We are going to do a in-person canvassing training with the Evanston Dems and ICA on in-person July 17th, which will include some role playing. So anybody who's interested, that'll be a great thing to come to. And I think that pretty much covers everything. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thanks to our speakers. And let's get out there and roll up our sleeves and quit wringing our hands. So thanks, everybody.